The instrument that I started on was actually the trumpet when I was 9 years old. And it took me several years to really get into the trumpet. My parents forced me to stay with it, and I was constantly rebelling and wanting to quit. And by about the age of 10, I actually started to get into the guitar because I was really into the Beatles and into, well, strictly the Beatles for a few years. I was just listening to Beatles and solo Beatles and learning all the stuff, the chord progressions on the guitar, and learning to sing. And that's kind of was in some ways my basis for a number of years. And of course, it became the Rolling Stones and then Eric Clapton and Jimi Hendrix. And then I got really into the blues. And I was really playing the guitar. The trumpet was this kind of, like having to eat spinach or something. It wasn't really something I was interested in, other than the weekly lessons. But it wasn't until I eventually, through this kind of musical journey, came upon Miles Davis, and So What was an album that my mom happened to have, and when I heard that I was around 14 years old, and then my life changed dramatically. I was young, but I was on a certain kind of trajectory, and I knew from very early on I was going to be a musician. I just thought I was going to be a different kind of musician. And so by about 14, then I went to Berkeley summer program and learned how to improvise over changes. Started getting the basis of that, and essentially for the next 10 years I was playing jazz and classical trumpet. And then around the age of 25 is when I went to Iraq to start studying traditional Iraqi music, mostly just thinking I was going to spend a few weeks to incorporate these elements into my jazz composing, but ended up being about 5 years. Iraq, I was there until just before the war started in 2002, and I was traveling throughout the Middle East and Europe, studying with different masters of the traditional Maqam. At that point, I wasn't playing trumpet at all. I put the trumpet down, I started learning how to sing, and I started learning the santur, which is the hammered dulcimer instrument that I play in the Two Rivers project. And from, so now it's kind of, I'm keeping the trumpet and the vocal and the santur kind of all in somewhat of a juggling act, because you spend a lot of time practicing one and then the other one starts to recede, so it's constantly, but on some level they all kind of benefit each other too. Like when I play the trumpet, I'm approaching it as a singer. When I play the santur, I'm incorporating the vocal and rhythmic elements of the music because it's a hammered instrument. So it's now, being a multi-instrumentalist and composing and curating at an art center and everything. This is just the way of a 21st century musician, I suppose. The Iraqi Maqam is this kind of amalgamation of many influences from within Iraq as well as outside of Iraq's borders. Throughout the centuries, it's been developing in this way. And so there's a beautiful kind of tapestry that's formed. In one composition, you might have, a Kurdish melody and then a Bedouin melody and a Turkish melody and a Persian melody. And these sort of go together seamlessly in a way that, politically we always think of these divisions. Now of course it's Sunni, Shia, and in the day it was Turks and Persians. And it's always been someone and someone. Interestingly though, you mentioned the Israeli, the Jewish musicians, this is before the state of Israel, played a very, very important role in the Maqam. In fact, almost all the instrumentalists, all the significant ones that we know of in the last century, were Jewish. And so there was an element of their, because again, every part of the society has its own sort of personal musical style, but it's all part of one larger musical picture. So they definitely influenced the way that the songs were sung, and a lot of the rhythms and stuff were kind of their property in a way. And when they left in 1951, 1952, there was a huge gap in the tradition. A lot of this stuff was lost, and some of it was brought back, and part of what I'm doing now is putting these pieces back together with archival recordings and kind of reintegrating some of these rhythms that have been kind of left to, old recordings, and they're scratchy and you can't really hear what's this instrument and what's that. And I've tried to talk to some of the Iraqi musicians now, like, oh no, that's just or they say, oh no, the Yehud, they had these secrets, the Jews had these secrets. I'm like, okay, but we can actually, let's decipher them a little bit, because we have the recordings and stuff. So, but yeah, and so that's within that tradition. But then, when I'm joining with jazz, and we can say what start as an African American, now is larger American, now it's becoming an international phenomenon. So there's a lot of elements that kind of come into play, and a lot of possible points of synergy and connection I find. It's not easy. I mean, the number of choices within any one tradition, it's hard enough. But when you're really talking about joining traditions, it's not been easy. I was lucky. I mean, I formed the Two Rivers Ensemble, which is the group that's the most kind of integrating of two traditions. I formed the group in 2006, and it's been the same personnel ever since, other than the saxophonist who was Rudresh Mahanthapa, now Ule Matisen. And I think through the process, by staying with the same musicians for an extended period of time, they start to understand where I'm coming from musically. I'm also influenced by their, when I write for the Two Rivers Ensemble, I'm writing for the musicians in that group. I'm not just writing a bass part and a oud part and a trumpet part and a saxophone part. So it's really, I think, just by maintaining a good connection with these musicians for a long time, and sort of our vocabularies and musical styles kind of growing as an ensemble, that's to me the only way it's really been successful. Because I mean, I've been part of many residencies and projects where you bring this musician, and it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen in 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 months. I mean, you're talking about musical vocabulary, and you're talking about centuries of tradition and people's own innovations within it, and it doesn't come together right away. I mean, I think I was lucky with the Two Rivers Ensemble when it started. It miraculously formed very quickly, but it's been an evolution over these last 7 years. Amir ElSaffar.